Hello, you're listening to Mike Madden on the Art Show podcast. Here you'll find interviews with authors, musicians, artists and anyone else in and around the arts. Some of the interviews are taken direct from the Art Show on Expat Radio, with one or two specials in between. This show features author Tom Lutz, who veered away from his non-fiction titles to create his first novel, Born Slippy. Hello, this is Mike Madden on the Art Show on Expat Radio, and tonight I've got another author on the show, a very special guest who is celebrating his first novel. So, welcome to the show, Tom Lutz, and your novel, Born Slippy.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for having me.
So, you're the professor in the Department of Creative Writing at the University of California, Riverside, and you've written a number of books, but this is the first novel. So what made you turn to being a novelist?
Well, I've been a novelist my entire life. I've just been procrastinating.
Right.
It took me a while to get around to it. No, I really seriously thought I would be a novelist since I was a kid, and I got sidetracked. I didn't realize that for a while that you had to kind of sit down and actually write the novel that you wanted to write. I thought maybe it would just happen. I was influenced by Henry Miller and Jack Kerouac and these people who were just seemed to be writing their own lives, and so I was living their life, versions of their lives, but I didn't sit down to write it. And then I went to grad school. I realized that there were people called professors in the world, and they got to read books for a living. So I went into that line of work, away from the carpentry and cooking and various things that I was doing until then. And I got my PhD, and that made me write a dissertation that was nonfiction, and that led me down a nonfiction path for many years. But the novel was always in the back of my mind, and I finally got around to doing it.
Well, it's an interesting tale, and the novel Born Slippy focuses on the tale of two men. And I'll let you give the listeners a synopsis without actually giving too much away.
Okay. It's not giving too much away to say that the novel opens with a large explosion in a bank building in Taipei, Taiwan, and that one of the two characters sees the reports of this explosion online. The other of the two men is involved with the explosion, perhaps dead in the explosion. And then we move back in time about 10 years and to when these two men met. Frank is 10 years older. He's 28, and he's building a house in Connecticut. And Dmitri, although his name is Russian, is actually British. He's from Liverpool. And he shows up at the age of 18 looking for a job. His parents are friends of Frank's, and so he ends up working over the summer for Frank, and that starts a relationship that goes through many years. Frank is a bit of a loser when we first meet him. He is a little bit like Candide, or he's, the reader is always a little bit ahead of him in ways that I think are fun and funny. Dmitri is much younger, but much more worldly and much more on top of what's happening, and extremely more amoral. He's just perhaps a sociopath, perhaps just a completely amoral person. And it's a story of the way these two men, one who's trying to be a good man and one who is not trying at all to be a good man, how they interact over time, and that ends us up in a bunch of criminality and mayhem.
It's really interesting because it does focus on two distinct characters. So how difficult did you find, obviously with your background in nonfiction, now that you're in the fiction world, how difficult did you find it to keep their lives apart as well as intertwining them?
Well, there are some small technical problems. Like at one point I realized that Dmitri had aged 5 years, but his kids had only aged 5 years. So I had I had to go back and fix some of those things, and eventually had to make a chart and make sure that everybody was the right age as we moved through the book. So there were little things like that, but in general, no, I found writing the novel incredibly easy. I just thought it was was pure pleasure, kind of more like watching TV than writing TV. I would be typing, but the characters would just go ahead and live their lives and do things that surprised me and made me laugh out loud at times, and got me worried for them. As if I wasn't creating them, but just watching their lives develop. It's a very, very deeply pleasurable activity, writing novels.
So you were a carpenter before you were a novelist, and or at the same time perhaps, and your main characters are in the world of carpentry. Do you think it was important, and particularly in fiction, to write about what you know?
Yes and no. I mean, I have always wanted to write something about my years as a carpenter, because I got a lot of pleasure out of that work. And I had never read anybody that was very good at describing what the pleasures of that life were. So I really wanted to write somebody that was a carpenter. That part was easy. And there are other cases where I travel a lot. My last couple of books have been travel books, and I wrote about places that I knew, well enough, like Taipei, northern Vietnam, California, obviously, Connecticut. These are all places that I knew well. And there's one city, and I'm not going to say which one it was, that I have never been to. I think maybe I represent that one better than I represent the ones that I know well. That is, I'm not relying on sometimes when you're describing something, if you know it really well, you don't remember what people need to know in order to see what you're showing them. Whereas if you're making something up and you're kind of inventing it, you're telling people what they need to know because you're discovering it yourself as you go along. So there's that old dictum that you write what you know. It's both true and not true. And since we were in the world of fiction, and fiction at its best does what I was just saying. That is, the characters, to the extent that you give them some reality, they react in real ways to the circumstances that you put them in, and they're not always ways that you could have predicted. And so the kind of fully engaged imagination develops its own reality, and you don't know what that is because you haven't been there yet. And so you can't know what you end up knowing by the end of the novel as a writer. And that's an important part of how fiction works on the creative side, and why it's valuable on the other side. That is why it's valuable for readers. It creates the reality rather than just describing it.
Yeah, I think that is the art of the novelist, or certainly one of the arts of the novelist. And you mentioned that in your own mind you've been a novelist for 50 years, and I think a lot of people think like that, because the old adage that everyone has got a book in them, and that, to my mind, is a novel, not a non-fiction piece. So do you see this as being sort of the ultimate in your creative life, or maybe the start of a creative life?
Yeah, no, I definitely I'm going to write more of them because I had so much fun doing it. And at this point in my life, I'm not climbing any ladders. I've reached the highest rung I'm going to reach in the various ladders that I've climbed over my life. I'm kind of done with all that, and I'm just in it for the process now. If the process is engaging me fully, then I'm all for it. I'm ready to do it. And the novel as a form does that. So I'm going to write more of them. I finished a book for a philosophy series since I finished Born Slippy, and I'm finishing up the third volume of my travel stuff. That is something that I started before I finished Slippy. So I'm finishing those up, but then I'll move on to the next novel as well.
I did notice a quote that screenwriters tend to be book writers and vice versa. So how easy do you think it would be to slip from one to the next? And do you think screenwriting is something that you might attempt?
I have done some. That is, I've got, and in fact, I've got a TV pilot and Bible out making the rounds right now. And I've done a number of feature screenplays, and I've worked on a couple of documentaries. So I've had some experience in that world, and it was part of what got me to finally write the novel, was having fun doing fiction feature work, and realizing what that was like. It's very similar. I mean, there are all sorts of ways that a screenplay is exactly like a novel, or I guess more like a short story, a feature screenplay. You can't fit a novel into a feature time frame, but it's very similar. It's different in that the screenplay also has to be a bit of a business plan. I just interviewed Walter Mosley on Saturday night, the great American crime and science fiction writer, and he's working on a TV show right now, and I asked him to talk about the relationship, and he said, well, the problem with the screenplay as a form, or TV writing as a form, is that he's brought up an idea in the writer's room the other day. He said, what I would like to do is have this guy kind of on a cliff over, in a kind of mansion in Pacific Heights over the Pacific Palisades, and have him kind of drive the car off that cliff. And the producer said, well, no, we can't afford that. we can't do that. That costs too much money. So always when you're writing a screenplay, you're thinking about what it's going to cost. When you decide that it's going to be a period piece, that is just increases the cost of everything. When you just write, whereas if you're going to write a historical novel, it doesn't increase the cost of doing the novel one iota. So those kind of again, technical parts of it are very different. But the basic stuff, where you're working with characters and narrative and creating scenes that hopefully move each character's arc forward at the same time, all of those kinds of fun, interesting, dramatic problems are the same for fiction and for screenplays.
So you've we'll come on to your non-fiction later, but I know you studied novelists. You began as a literary critic and cultural historian, but studying novelists, did that put you off writing a novel or encourage you?
Yeah, well, at certainly at first it was incredibly discouraging, because when you do a PhD in literary studies, you end up reading hundreds and hundreds of the world's greatest novels. And so there was a period where when I sat down and tried to write some fiction, Toni Morrison would be sitting on one shoulder and Henry James on the other, and they'd both be cackling a little bit at my attempts. So it definitely was a little bit daunting. I then started the Los Angeles Review of Books, and that had me reading a lot of novels, some of which will join those shelves with Morrison and James, and some of which definitely will not. And that gave me the encouragement that I could get in the game as well. But I'm somewhere in the middle, and that's good enough.
Well, talking of being in the middle, we're somewhere near the middle of our show. So we're going to go to a break now, and this is Steve Harley, and I've Just Seen a Face.
Just seen her face, I can't forget the time or place where we just met. She's just the girl for me, and I want all the world to see we've met. Oh, had it been another day, I might have looked the other way, and I'd have never been aware. But as it is, I'll dream of her tonight. La da 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 da. Falling. Yeah, I am falling, and she keeps calling me back again. I have never known the likes of this. I've been alone and I have missed things and kept out of sight, but other girls were never quite like this. La da 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 da. Falling, yeah, I am falling, and she keeps calling me back again. Kick on. I've just seen her face, I can't forget the time or place where we just met. She's just the girl for me. I want all the world to see we met. La da 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 da. Had it been another day, I might have looked the other way, and I'd have never been aware. But as it is, I'll dream of her tonight. La da 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 da. Falling. Yes, I am falling, and she keeps calling me back again. Falling, yes, I am falling, and she keeps calling me back again.
Hello, this is Mike Madden on the Art Show on Expat Radio, and tonight I'm delighted to welcome back to the show Tom Lutz. Welcome back, Tom.
Thanks, Mike.
I know we were talking about your novel Born Slippy and your 50-year journey into writing to being a novelist, but you've also got quite an accomplished career in non-fiction books, and I'm particularly intrigued by your travel titles because they have unusual titles and you have an unusual mission associated with those travel books. So just tell our listeners a little bit about that.
Well, yeah, I'm not sure it's a mission. It's just an obsession. I do have a desire to go everywhere. So I've been traveling a lot, especially, kids all grown and gone. It's a little bit easier to get out and about. And but even as a kid, I would hitchhike around the United States and go wherever the car was going. I was ready to just put on as many miles as I possibly could any chance I got. So the books are the result of those travels. It was partly that I kept claiming the travel as a deduction on my taxes, and I thought, well, I better write a book so that in case I get audited by the IRS.
I've heard some reasons for writing books. That's the first one I've heard of that one.
The tax man. I went ahead and started. I was taking notes, and I realized that the only parts of the writing that I really loved were the parts where I was talking about bumping into interesting people, this kind of accidental intimacy that you can have on the road because you're meeting someone, in the middle of a ruined Casbah in Morocco or on a tiny dirt road in southern India. And you both know that you're never going to see each other again. There's no reason to be careful or put on airs or pose or anything else. It's just there's a kind of purity to the interaction, and also you're both kind of interested in each other. I'm obviously interested in the person I've bumped into because they live in a place that I'm in for the very first time in my life, in a culture that's new to me. And in a lot of the places that I go, I'm one of the few Americans that they've ever met. I'm one of the few Americans to kind of wander into their very, very off the beaten path home. So I really I'm trying in these travel books to write up the record of these little meetings, and so they're all short anecdotes. I think in each book, there are 30 or 40 different countries represented, and most of them revolve around one of these chance meetings.
The first one was called Drinking Mare's Milk on the Roof of the World, and that was followed by And the Monkey Learned Nothing. So I'm intrigued to know the title of the third one, but also your aim is to visit every country on Earth. How far through the list are you? And there's always new countries popping up as countries divide or become sectionalized.
Yes, and one of my favorite things was the kind of breakup of Yugoslavia. I mean, obviously, I feel terrible about all of the bloodshed that came out of that breakup, but it means that I've now been in 6 countries where I had been in only one before.
Right.
Because I had been in all of the different parts, but the map keeps changing. And it depends on how you count. There are 192 nations in the UN, but a lot of nations that aren't in the UN, and a lot of places that, for instance, there is something called the League of Unrecognized Nations that includes Transnistria, South Ossetia, Abkhazia, a number of other countries around the world that have not been recognized by many more countries than each other in a lot of cases. And some of them are breakaway ethnic Russian enclaves of former Soviet states. Some are, the southern part of Morocco, which has declared itself an independent state, but is not recognized by very many other countries. So there are lots of those kinds of countries. And then there are places like Gibraltar or French Guiana or Réunion, these places that are technically still parts of other countries, but they have a culture that is their own. They're far from their home nation, and they seem like separate countries to me. So if you count that way, there are 250 or so.
Right.
And of those, I've been to 140 or so. Most of what's left are islands, so a lot of Caribbean islands, a lot of South Pacific islands that I haven't been to, so I don't know. I'm not that young, so I really kind of have to get cracking.
Well, there's certainly a couple of books worth of places still to visit, it sounds like.
Yeah. And the third volume is called The Kindness of Strangers.
The Kindness of Strangers. That's a more reasonable title. I'm intrigued as to where the monkey title came from.
Well, I was in Bali, and there's a temple on the kind of southwestern tip of the island. It's up on top of a cliff, and the entire area is overrun by monkeys. And people will sell you bunches of bananas at the bottom of the cliff that you can feed the monkeys with. And I was up at the top. I had been at a ceremony inside the temple for a while, and I was in a very kind of relaxed mood. And there's a place where you can stand and look out at the ocean, the waves crashing into the cliff, hundreds of feet below you, and it's idyllic spot. And there were other tourists there, and one guy was a Westerner, was feeding bananas to the monkeys. And at one point, he was kind of holding a banana out, and a monkey, fairly large male, kind of came in, took a swipe at it, and he pulled the banana back. And his group, there was, I don't know if it was family or friends, they all kind of chuckled, "Oh, this is funny," playing keep away from the monkey. And he did that a couple times. And then the last time the monkey came in, and instead of going for the banana, he grabbed the guy's glasses.
Right.
Off his head. And they were very fancy glasses. They were like architect's glasses. They looked expensive. And the man was now very upset. And the monkey was sitting on a branch, twirling the glasses in his hand. And the man was offering him the entire bunch of bananas. And the monkey looked at the glasses, looked at the bananas, went back and forth, and the man was kind of almost crying, pleading with the monkey. And the monkey finally came in, like they were kind of like God and Adam on the Sistine Chapel. They were kind of getting closer and closer to the handoff, the glasses for the bananas. And at the last minute, the monkey just swiped the bananas, took the entire bunch, kept the glasses, went back to his branch, looked at the glasses, looked at the tourist, looked at the glasses, looked at the tourist, and then tossed the glasses over his shoulder, and we all watched them kind of circle down in the wind and crash into the waves. And it was just this act of pure revenge and nastiness on the part of the monkey. And it's
fascinating
that the way he did it, the way the monkey like let the tourist know that he understood exactly what the tourist wanted, that he knew exactly what the value of the glass was, that he was considering whether or not to give them back, and then tossing them over his shoulder like that. It struck me that the monkeys are completely capable of building a culture equivalent to that of human beings. They have all of the nastiness of the human race. They have all of the ability to think about possible scenarios, and they don't do it. And it's partly because I feel that monkeys are a little sociopathic. They are really nasty creatures. I don't know if you've ever had a monkey throw their feces at you, which has happened to me in a couple of places. They're not good people.
I have only had that in the safety of my car. So
so at any rate, I just so the idea that the monkey kind of the man learned something. I feel from this interchange. I'm not sure the monkey did. So that's where the title came from.
Now, you also won an American Book Award. Obviously, travel writing it's something that quite a few people dabble in. But your American Book Award was for Doing Nothing, A History of Loafers, Loungers, Slackers and Bums in America, which I think is a unique title and subject, probably.
Yeah, there aren't a lot of histories of slackers. That was a fun book. It started out as I thought I was writing a book about anger. I had written a book before that on the history of weeping, the history of tears, and called Crying: The Natural and Cultural History of Tears. And I thought, I'm going to be the emotion guy. I'm going to write. I had also written a book about nervousness. My next one's going to be about anger. I was fascinated by anger because of the way anger functions in comedy, as well as the way we know it functions in relation to shame and this kind of thing. It happened to be when my son was 18 and had moved into my house. He was going to take a year off before he went to college, and he proceeded to kind of lay on the couch and watch TV. And I'd be down in my basement office working, and I'd come up, and he was still laying on the couch. He was working on his resume so he could go out and get a job. And for some reason, when I came up and I'd see him laying on the couch, it would infuriate me. And here I was writing a book about anger. And I thought, and I was writing a book about anger in part, frankly, because I had a very angry father. And one of my goals as a parent was not to be an angry parent. And I'd been really successful at it for 20 some years. He had a couple of older siblings. So I was surprised, kind of shocked by this fury that would hit me. And I'd turn around and I'd go back downstairs and kind of breathe it out and get myself back to normal state and come back up and say, "So, how's the resume going?" And he would say, "Well, yeah, I'm working on it." And his resume was, I went to high school. I mean, there wasn't a lot more that he could put on the resume than that. So there was no real excuse for it taking a week or 2 weeks. So I decided that the first chapter of this book was going to be called Cody on the Couch, and I was going to write about my anger at seeing him on the couch and try to figure out what that was about and analyze that as my my entry into the book, my opening gambit. And as I researched anger about slackers, anger about, I first ran into a bunch of things on the web about people infuriated by what were called in the Clinton era welfare queens. These people who supposedly had babies so that they could collect more welfare and were gaming the system, and there's this incredible vitriol about these, somewhat mythic characters, and so I became more and more fascinated by the idea that people were mad at each other if they thought they weren't working enough. And of course, if you're in a workspace where you feel you're doing much more than the person in the next cubicle or the farther down the assembly line or on the job site, you can get pissed off. And so what started out as a book about anger turned into a book about work and not working and slackers. And so it was a bit of an accidental book in that sense. I got fascinated by these characters like the Big Lebowski, or Jack Kerouac, who I mentioned earlier, who were kind of famous for doing nothing. Kevin Smith and his slacker movies. Kevin Smith, of course, is a workaholic. He's done more than a movie a year since he got started. And Jack Kerouac was a workaholic. He writes about wandering around the country and hanging out and getting high. But in fact, the thing that he wanted to do the most was get back to his mother's house in North Carolina and sit down and type forever. He was a workaholic too. And Samuel Johnson, who signed himself as the Idler and the Rambler, wrote a dictionary by himself. It was a job that, in every other case took teams of hundreds of people to do. Yeah. He was a workaholic as well. And then some of the great workaholics, they're supposed champions of the work ethic, like Benjamin Franklin, turn out to be closet slackers as well. So it was partly running into all of this great historical material that turned it from being chapter one into being the book itself.
This has been a fantastic journey around your various writings, and we're going to have to come right back to the beginning again now, the beginning of your first novel with Born Slippy. So just we've got a couple of minutes left. Just tell our listeners where they can find out a little bit more about yourself and your wonderful website, and also your novel, where they can get hold of it.
My website is tomlutzwriter.com, and it has information about where you can buy Born Slippy or any of the other books. It's available at your local bookstore, I hope. If not, they can get it. It's available at Amazon and Barnes and Noble and all of the other IndieBound, if people use that, and any of the bookstores where you buy your books. I think it's a fun ride. I think it's an interesting book. I am a literary critic, so if you are a connoisseur of the genre, you'll realize that a lot of the little events and characters are reference other classics in the genre, from Chandler and Walter Mosley and Patricia Highsmith and so on. And I think it's fun as an entertainment, as Graham Greene said about his books, but also as a piece of literature in the tradition.
We certainly wish you all the best with Born Slippy, and perhaps in a few months' time you'll come back on the show and talk about The Kindness of Strangers, or maybe the sequel to Born Slippy, or a completely unrelated second novel.
Well, I hope so. I am thinking that Still Slippy will be the next book.
Right. Excellent. Well, thank you very much for coming on. You've been an absolutely wonderful guest.
My pleasure, Mike. Thanks for having me, and it was fun talking to you.
And we're going to play out with an old friend of the station. This is Susie Quattro and Heart on the Line.
You don't know what you put me through. It's been hell. Trying to talk to you. Lies are weak, so it's truth I'll speak. under your spell. I've been an empty shell, and it was my heart on the line. It was my heart all the time. All those dreams I thought were mine, miles away, and it was my heart on the line. It was my heart all the time, like a poem that's lost its rhyme, miles away, miles away, miles away. I was blind, too blind to see. I gave you everything. You denied to me, and it was my heart on the line. It was my heart all the time. All those dreams I thought were mine, miles away. You're miles away, miles away.
You've been listening to the Arts Show podcast with Mike Madden. Come back soon for more artists, authors, musicians and anyone else connected with the arts. We're going to play out with Mike Sanchez and I Don't Stand a Chance.
Baby, you hiding something that you don't want me to know, because I'm getting a vibe from way down the side, like you're just about ready to go. If you can't tell me where you stayed last night, you just can't cope with treating me right. I'm on the road to heartbreak, now's the time to tell me so, because I'm getting a chill like I'm gonna be ill. I know you don't want me no more. I won't be satisfied with your little white lies. Girl, I've only just begun to realize I don't stand a chance. I don't stand a chance. You don't wanna know and I can't make you dance. Well, I said goodbye. Find yourself another guy. I wish you were mine, but I'm losing my mind. I don't stand a chance. Tell me so, because I'm getting a chill like I'm gonna be ill. I know you don't want me no more. I won't be satisfied with your little white lies. Girl, I've only just begun to realize I don't stand a chance. chin.